ever heard someone say that the Bible is the white man's book? The reason they say that is because many times interpretations and teachings of the Bible are often influenced by European history originating from their perceived superiority. In addition, the grounds for proving that Scripture is true are usually provided from European sources. However, there are other sources that prove the authenticity of Scripture, and they were often ignored. In this session, we will talk about why Bible scholars remain silent about these truths. All right, let's get into this. We have quite a bit to dig into. The main question on the table right now is, why was the Ethiopian Bible ignored and rejected? So this article from Hub Pages is going to provide somewhat of an explanation. It says, other than the 66 books that make up the King James Bible, the Ethiopic Bible has 88 books and includes some works that other churches simply do not have. The book contains scrolls from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and scrolls that had never been seen before. What makes this so interesting is that they had these scrolls long before Christianity first arrived in their society in the 4th century. In other words, Christianity was not a religion given to them like most nations. Christianity was already present in Ethiopia. Since the 4th century, Ethiopia has been a Christian nation. So when it says Christianity here, it's talking about the practices of the early believers. The early believers were called Christians. Their practices were later twisted somewhat and turned into a religion after the Ethiopians received the gospel. That's why it says Christianity was not a religion given to them like most nations. The gospel was already there because the apostles and disciples did a lot of ministry work there. They were evangelizing. So it goes on to talk about an Ethiopian monk who visited Ethiopia in the 6th century, and he made note of the fact that it was a Christian country. Why? Because he saw them walking in the things taught by the apostles. He also observed how the rulers opened their borders to many believers who became refugees as a result of the persecution from kingdoms and empires that opposed their belief. So this ties in with what we talked about regarding our people running into other African nations after the fall of Jerusalem and before then. He also talks about certain, and make note of the word certain, Ethiopian tribes have been worshiping the Christian God for over 3,500 years, he says. And this is where I have to explain for those who believe that this is saying that all of the Ethiopians were Israelites. No. Ham is the father of the Ethiopians. However, some adopted the ways of the Israelites. Some also claim descent from Solomon. So just because they adopted the ways did not make them Israelites. And this is the same thing we try to get the Gentile believers to understand. The other fact is that during the siege of Jerusalem, a lot of our people ran into Ethiopia as well as other African countries. But the evidence here is saying that certain sects in the nation followed the Torah long before they were Christianized. And that is why they already had copies of the Old Testament. After they received the gospel, they also had some of the letters found in the New Testament. As I go on, you will see why this information about them having these books remain hidden. It says, despite having all these credentials and authenticity, the Ethiopian Bible is still discarded and not taken as part of the canon of the holy books. In fact, most people, including believers of the same faith, have never heard of the Ethiopian Bible. That's to show you the extent of what was done to discredit and hide the Ethiopian Bible. This begs the question, why? Why was the Ethiopian Bible banned from the Holy Bible? So the author says to understand that, let's take a little history lesson. The Bible as we know it today wasn't actually how the Bible was in the past. There were many versions of different parts of the Bible, as well as many different interpretations and ideas of what the Bible was thought to be saying. He says, as we all know, the Bible texts were originally written in Hebrew before being translated into other languages. The first translation was done by a man known as Jerome, and he translated it from Hebrew to Latin. He was responsible for putting together what is known as the Vulgate around the year 400, and the Vulgate still remains the principal Latin version, or the translation of the Bible. It had 27 books called the New Testament and 39 books called the Old Testament. At that time, it was called the Hebrew Bible. He says, now that we've taken a short course on the history of the Bible, it's time to answer the major question of why the Ethiopian Bible was rejected. So he says there are many diverse reasons, but the major reason he's going to give is because the Ethiopian Bible includes additional books known as pseudo-epigraphs. Now, some say they're called pseudepigraphical texts. So he says the pseudo-epigraphs are falsely attributed works and texts whose claimed author is not the true author, or whose real author attributed it to a figure of the past, like fan fiction. So he says pseudo-epigraphs are considered non-canonical by most other Christian traditions. The books that were removed or rejected were ones that scribes and theologians of the time already knew were not divinely inspired. So he says he can understand his reason for them removing it. I don't accept that explanation as to why it was rejected. So let me show you why. Let's challenge this argument with this article from JSTOR entitled The Scrolls of the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. One of the many significant contributions that the Dead Sea Scrolls have made is to provide original language copies of several books previously known only through translations or translations of translations. Among these are several works which belong in the categories of Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. The books of the Apocrypha, fragments which have surfaced at Qumran, are Tobit, Sirach, the Epistle of Jeremiah, Baruch, Psalm, and it lists copies of two of the Pseudepigrapha have been identified, naming First Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, and sources for the testaments of the 12 patriarchs have also been found. Question: why didn't they reject the Dead Sea Scrolls? It contains pseudepigraphical books like Enoch, Baruch, Tobit. So do you see why that argument was not valid? It wasn't because it contained the apocryphal books. No, that was definitely not the reason. Let's go on. I'm going to share excerpts from this article from the collegechurch.org, and it is saying that the evidence proved that the New Testament was written in the first century. Now, this would have been closer to the time of Messiah and the apostles. It's saying in the 1830s, German scholars of the Tübingen School tried to date the books as late as the 3rd century, but the discovery of some New Testament manuscripts and fragments from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, one of which dates as early as 125 AD, disproves a 3rd century date of composition for any book now in the New Testament. Additionally, a letter to the church at Corinth in the name of Clement of Rome in 95 AD quotes from 10 of the 27 books of the New Testament, and a letter to the church at Philippi in the name of Polycarp in 120 quotes from 16 New Testament books. It also speaks of letters. They were written by Ignatius, a student of John, who was martyred in the arena at Rome. And it says he quotes from several New Testament books as well. His letters were closer to 107 AD. So again, having manuscripts that were written closer to the time of Messiah and the apostles adds more reliability to the writings. The Ethiopians had some of those writings, but European religious leaders rejected it and remained silent about those documents. So it's fair to say that historically speaking, European colonization and their missionary activities created a whitewashed version of Christianity. The religious teachings were often intertwined with their cultural norms and prejudice, and this led to criticisms, and rightfully so, that the Bible reflects a Eurocentric worldview. But the Ethiopian Bible, which existed over 800 years before the King James Bible, presented a different worldview. It reflected the importance and relevance of quote-unquote black lives and black culture. Was that the real reason for rejecting it? And that's something we have to face. Was that the real reason that they rejected this information? If they had taken the Ethiopic text into account, they would have been able to show that the Ethiopians had copies of writings from the book of Matthew. But Europeans wanted to make the New Testament theirs. It was their book. So they excluded Africans and other melanated groups. They didn't want to put forth what the Ethiopians had. This article from Asian and African Studies says the 4 Gospels are the central religious scriptures of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which traces its history to the 1st century AD, when an Ethiopian court official on pilgrimage to Jerusalem was first met on his way back by Saint Philip, who baptized him. This is recorded in Acts 8:26 through 40. I'm going to read just a snippet from this article from Bible Archaeology Report. And it says scholars date the writing of Matthew's Gospel to the late 50s or early 60s in the 1st century. So this was due to a comment that was made by Irenaeus. Now listen to this from Blue Letter Bible. They're asking the question, when were the 4 Gospels written? It says the evidence shows that the 4 Gospels were written in a relatively short time after the death and resurrection of Messiah. Examining the internal evidence of the New Testament itself can make this plain. The evidence is as follows, and I'm only going to touch on point 1. It says the first 3 Gospels, and possibly also the 4th, were apparently written while the city of Jerusalem was still standing. Each of the first 3 Gospels contains predictions by Messiah concerning the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, but none records the fulfillment. We know that Titus the Roman destroyed the city and temple in AD 70. Hence, the composition of the first 3 Gospels most likely occurred sometime before this event. Otherwise, their destruction would have been recorded. The fact that all four Gospels are written from the perspective that the city of Jerusalem and the temple had not been destroyed gives evidence of an early date. And what did the Ethiopians have? They had the first four books. This is what we have to consider. Because Ethiopia was not colonized like the other African nations, they held on to a lot of their books. But our people, on the other hand, were chased out of the land, forced to migrate into other countries. They were being persecuted, forced to convert to Christianity or Islam. They lost a lot of the books. Some were taken, destroyed, and burned. Our people were eventually captured, enslaved, and trafficked around the world. So they were not able to keep their books. And what was the plan of the enemy? To cut us off from being a nation. They separated us from our history and identity. Listen to this journal article from JSTOR, where they burn books. It says there is a specter haunting Israelite history, the burning of books. The writings of a people often described as logocentric have been especially vulnerable to fiery destruction, as though those pyres were a way of striking at the very existence of the Israelites. The frequency with which the horror and the fear of burned books punctuate Israelite history can be discerned as a distinctive pattern of the diaspora. For over 2 millennia, the books of this people have been deliberately burned by their enemies, who seized upon a way to inflict special and distinctive pain. To wish this people ill was often expressed by incriminating, desecrating, and incinerating the books that Israelites studied and cherished. To set their sacred texts on fire was a way of accelerating, listen, the disappearance or extinction of those who read such works out of existential and theological compulsion. Just think about what that just said. Listen to this from Religion News Service. It says, in the final decade of the 1400s in Granada, Spain, the Spanish Inquisition's Grand Inquisitor Cardinal Jimenez de Cisneros oversaw the burning of multiple Torah scrolls and other Israelite books, as well as 5,000 Arabic manuscripts. In 1509, he followed by ordering the burning of libraries and archives of the northern African city of Oran as the Spanish forces began its occupation. So wherever we went, we had those who were determined to cut us off from being a nation. They were on our heels, engaging in tyranny against us. Notice it says they burned libraries and archives in cities in northern African cities. Why were they burning books in other African countries? They had to destroy evidence. And the pattern followed us all the way to the interior of Africa. Where were we taken from? Negro land. What was in the same area? Timbuktu. Timbuktu is famous for its historic libraries and manuscripts. Now look at this map of Negro land in Guinea. And you see I have Timbuktu highlighted in the green circle right above the word Negro land. Do you think there would have been a slight chance that Israelites living in the area would have been writing and adding books to the library in Timbuktu? Even if they didn't, do you think the library would have had books about us and our history? Books our enemies needed to get rid of as they continued their quest to either destroy or replace us. And this is a close-up view so that you can see the area known as the Slave Coast right below Timbuktu in Guinea. It's right next to the Gold Coast. But notice that it has KM of Judah. It means Kingdom of Judah. Family, we didn't make these maps. They had these maps in the 1700s, and this is the information they tried to destroy. But as you can see, they missed a few. I have another map. This one is from princeton.edu that I found years ago. This one was not easy to find. So I will leave the link in the description for those of you who like to study along with me. This is one you want to save because a lot of the sources that I found years ago on the internet were scrubbed. They're no longer there. So you see where the green box is. There's a city there called Lamlem. Lamlem. And the words that the cartographer wrote on the map is that according to El-Eldrisi, the land here was peopled by Jews. Well, who was El-Eldrisi? He was a Muslim geographer and cartographer who served in the court of King Roger II. You would think that he knows what he's talking about, right? But this information was written on the maps. They had a lot of information to direct those who would come after them during this age of exploration. They knew where to go to get grain, gold, slaves. And this is telling us that they found Israelites living in Negro land. This information was well known, and this is why they tried to burn the libraries and the books. So now that we're uncovering these truths, we need to share it far and wide. Why were Judeans living in Negro land if they were not dark melanated people living in this area? Come on, how long would people with no air conditioning or modern means to keep themselves cool live in that area? Come on now. We have to know that they knew this information way back when. This one is an old source written between 1600 and 1676. What was happening during that time, family? The European slave trade. But it says, many Jews or Judeans are also scattered over this region. What region? The same area we just talked about. How do we know that? Because it goes on to say, some are natives, boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Where did they live? On either side of the Niger River, right there in Negro land. It says others are Asian strangers who fled thither, or they fled to this area later, either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea, wasted and depopulated, listen, by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and lo and behold, it says Christians. Wow, why were Christians persecuting the Judeans? I need you to really think about that. The Christians. It says, or else such as came out of, these are the other places where they came from. They came from Europe, whence they were banished, out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Countries in 1350, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. Why were they coming from all of these places? They were being persecuted. It says these all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks We were hated by the Turks, that they are not admitted, they're not allowed to be Mohammedans unless first baptized. And then no otherwise made use of. It's like this is the only reason they're allowing you to become a Muslim. It's because they wanted to receive their customs and gather in their taxes. But do you see that a distinction was being made between early believers who were Israelites from those who were Gentiles? Christian became the identity marker for Europeans who adopted the religion. And let's not deceive ourselves. The persecution our people suffered from the Muslims was just as bad as what they suffered at the hands of the Christians. Now, in this source, the author is going to describe the physical characteristics of the Israelites. So he says, I have two objects in inviting the attention of the society to the subject of the physical characteristics of the Yehudis. In the first place, I should be glad to elicit from those who have already considered it their views as to what peculiarities of form and feature do really constitute that type, which most of us believe to distinguish the Hebrews from every other people. So what did they find out? The author says it is true that Professor Owen has lately expressed himself very positively in the same sense with the illustrious ethnologist just quoted. He professes indeed to derive from the variations of the Israelite race a proof of the unity of origin of mankind. For 1800 years, says he, that race has been dispersed in different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. There are some Israelites still lingering in the valleys of the Jordan, having been oppressed by the successive conquerors of Syria for ages. A low race of people, listen, and described by trustworthy travelers as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. Boy, oh boy, they definitely had to hide this because the powers that be had the world believing that the Israelites had a pale hue. Here he is describing what they look like, as black as any of the Ethiopians. Let's go on. So you have to take this passage from Amos 9 and 7 into consideration, where the Most High says, Are you not like the people of Ethiopia to me, O children of Israel? Says the Most High, Did I not bring up Israel from the land of Egypt, the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Ker? Now, this one comes from Encyclopedia of the Jewish Diaspora. It says Origins, Experiences, and Culture. And this image that is presented here is what is presented to the world. But the sources we read earlier told us what our people looked like. So it says, in later centuries, Yehudis are believed to have settled in Western Africa during the height of the Songhai, Mali, Ghana, and Kanem Bornu empires. According to accounts from explorers of the region, several powerful Israelite families of the Songhai Empire were of Israelite origin until Askia Muhammad came to power and in 1492, is that date ringing a bell, decreed that all Yehudis either convert to Islam or leave the region. According to certain records, in Timbuktu, Where are the records? In Timbuktu. According to certain records in Timbuktu, an older community was formed by a group of Egyptian Israelites who traveled by way of the Sahel corridor through Chad into Mali. Another community was that of Zua, ruler of Kukia. And where was it located? Near the Niger River, whose name is only known as Zua. And he has a pretty long name here, but it means he comes from Yemen. It says local legends state that Zua was a member of one of the Israelite colonies transported from Yemen by the Abyssinians in the 6th century. It is also said that he traveled into West Africa along with his brother and eventually established a local Israelite community between Mali and northern Nigeria. Some accounts place West African Israelite communities in the Ondo forests of Dahomey, south of Timbuktu. It says in the 1930s, these groups still maintained, listen, a Torah scroll written in Aramaic that had been burned into parchment with a hot iron instead of ink so that it could not be changed. Did you catch that, family? Where were the records? In Timbuktu. Now, how would they know that? Do you see how all of this is coming together? Let's go on. Let's take a look at this one. This one is called History, Jewish Roots in Africa by George E. Lichtbau. It says, the Israelite presence in Africa began to spread significantly in the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Christian era. I wonder why. What was happening during that time? Extending not only into the Sahara Desert, but also reaching down along the West African coast and possibly also to some Bantu tribes of southern Africa, where some 40,000 members of the Limba tribe still claim Jewish roots. Did you catch that? In addition, it says Israelite, Arab, and Christian accounts cite the existence of Israelite rulers of certain tribal groups and clans identifying themselves as Israelites. They're scattered throughout Mauritania, Senegal, and Western Sudan, Nigeria, and Ghana. Here's another one for good measure, and this is called Piling On. So this book is called West African Countries and Peoples. It says Vindication of the African Race. So it says the Israelitish descendants, or the inhabitants occupying the central portion of Africa, passed forward seeking shelter to the south and west. Why were they seeking shelter? They were being chased and persecuted. So it says a part, namely those from the east central crossing the Benue or the Jaliba branch of the Niger, descended gradually southward and became intermingled with the original inhabitants. Again, why were they being chased? Because of who they are, who they were. It says protected from incursion on the north by the Benue River and quietly settled between the Great Niger and Old Calabar rivers, they remained in peace and grew from one generation to another in idolatry, but still leaving tangible proofs in the form of their religion of the Judaistic origin of the inhabitants. Family, I hope it is clear to you that some of those folks were determined to hide the truth they knew. So it's fair for people to ask, why should they be trusted now? This article from BBC is called Timbuktu Manuscripts, Mali's Ancient Documents Captured Online. It says a virtual gallery was created to showcase Mali's cultural history, and it has been launched online featuring tens of thousands of Timbuktu's ancient manuscripts. The manuscripts were smuggled to safety from Timbuktu after Islamist militant groups took control of the city in northern Mali in 2012. They contain centuries of African knowledge and scholarship on topics ranging from maths to astrological charts. Listen, it says central to the heritage of Mali, they represent the long legacy of written knowledge and academic excellence in Africa, said Dr. Abdel Kadir Hadera, a librarian known for smuggling the manuscripts out of Timbuktu, who was also involved in the project. The collection, called Mali Magic, also captures Malayan culture beyond the manuscripts. It was put together by Google, along with local and international partners. My question is, should they be trusted with these documents? Just saying. Here's the reason why they smuggled the documents out. It says in 2016, an alleged member of an Islamic group, and they named this man Ahmad, was found guilty of intentionally ordering attacks on religious and historic buildings where? In Timbuktu, by the International Criminal Court. He was sentenced to 9 years in jail and apologized. It was the first time that the court in The Hague had tried a case of cultural destruction. Now, this information comes from Smithsonian, and it says when Al Qaeda Islamists invaded Mali and then Timbuktu in 2012, among their targets, listen, were priceless manuscripts, books that needed to be burned. Did you catch that? They were looking for priceless manuscripts, books that needed to be burned. Now, normally if people are looking for things that are priceless, they're looking to sell it. No, they want to destroy it. It says, but the damage could have been much worse if not for men like Abdel Kadir Hadera, who risked their lives to protect the medieval works. He and others succeeded in smuggling out 350,000 manuscripts, proving not only how much the books were valued, but also the lengths to which ordinary people were willing to go to save them. It was a remarkable victory in the long history of books threatened by would-be arsonists, and a relatively rare one at that. Now, these were not would-be arsonists. These people were on assignment. They were told, they were paid to go there and destroy evidence. So, family, as you can see, our enemies have been hard at work, but they tried and failed to destroy all of the evidence. The Most High kept some of it hidden from them, and then He left breadcrumbs so that we could find our way home. The thing is, these nations have to know that they will give an account for everything they've done. We served our time. Now it's their turn. Listen to what Yah says here in Zephaniah 3:8-10. Therefore wait for me. He's speaking to Israel. Wait for me, says the Most High, until the day I rise up for plunder. My determination is to gather the nations to my assembly of kingdoms. Why? To pour on them my indignation, all my fierce anger. All the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. For then I will restore to the peoples a pure language, that they all may call on the name of the Most High, to serve Him with one accord. Listen, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering. Did you hear that? He's going to restore everything we've lost. There are sources still hidden out there. Books that we can't read yet. But the day is coming when everything that was lost will be restored, even our language. Even our language. So we're going to wrap up here. But if this message has been a blessing to you, remember to hit the like and please share it. There are people who need to know this. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. So until next time, be blessed, family.